The morning drizzle in Portland tapped a gentle rhythm against the windows of Sweet Bloom Bakery, a soft percussion to the hum of the coffee machine brewing its first batch of the day. The air inside was warm, filled with the comforting scent of fresh lemon cupcakes and roasted coffee mingling with the earthy smell of rain-soaked streets, drifting in from the Pearl District outside. I adjusted the last tray of pastries in the glass display case, their golden tops glistening under the soft glow of fairy lights strung across the ceiling. It was supposed to be an ordinary Monday morning in early June, the kind where locals shuffled in for their usual orders, the jingle of the door, a steady heartbeat of the neighborhood. But sometimes ordinary mornings turn into the stage for moments that change everything. I was tying a pink ribbon around a box of cupcakes for Mrs. Carter, her weekly order for her book club, when my phone buzzed on the counter, its vibration cutting through the gentle murmur of morning customers. I glanced at the screen, expecting a reminder about Avery's school pickup. She had a field trip today, and I'd promised to pack her favorite blueberry muffin. Instead, it was a text from my husband, Ethan. The words hit me like a cold splash of rain on a warm day. "I'm leaving you. Sam and I are moving to Los Angeles. Sorry, babe, I've cleaned out our joint account. Good luck." My heart lurched a sudden weight in my chest, but my hands didn't falter as I finished the bow of the ribbon, curling perfectly, despite the chaos unfolding inside me. The world seemed to tilt for a moment, the steady rhythm of the bakery, clinking mugs' soft laughter, the hiss of the espresso machine, fading into a surreal hum. 14 years of marriage, reduced to a casual text message, sent while I was elbow-deep in frosting and flour. "Here's your usual order, Mrs. Carter," I said, my voice steady, a practiced calm that didn't betray the storm brewing beneath the surface. I handed her the box, my smile as warm as the bakery's lighting. "I bet your book club has some lively discussions lined up." She smiled back, her kind eyes crinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses, oblivious to the bomb that had just detonated in my life. "Oh, we do indeed. This week we're diving into a story about resilience in the face of adversity. Funny how life mirrors literature sometimes, isn't it?" Her words landed like a quiet prophecy, but I only nodded, the corners of my mouth still upturned. If only she knew. After she left the door, jingling softly behind her, I stood alone behind the counter, staring at Ethan's message, the screen glowing with his cruelty. No explanation, no conversation, just a digital goodbye that shattered our life with the efficiency of a business transaction. I read it again, the words searing into me. "Sam Los Angeles cleaned out our joint account, good luck." Sam Harper, his 22-year-old sales assistant, the girl who'd laughed too loudly at his jokes at last year's company picnic. I should have seen it then, but I'd been too busy baking to notice the cracks. The initial shock ebbed, replaced by a strange calm, a stillness I hadn't expected. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. Instead, I walked to my small office behind the bakery, the scent of yeast and sugar following me like a loyal friend, and pulled out a manila envelope I'd prepared weeks ago. I placed it on the counter, calling out to my assistant Jenna, who was wiping down a table nearby. "If Ethan stops by, give him this." I said, my tone as casual as if I were asking her to refill the coffee station. Jenna nodded her brow, furrowing slightly, but she didn't ask questions. She'd seen me handle rush hour chaos with the same composure I was showing now. A quiet strength that belied the fact that I'd been preparing for this moment longer than I cared to admit. I've always been good at balancing the books you see both in my bakery and in my life, a skill honed through years of freelance accounting. And Ethan, he'd left a trail of numbers that told a story I couldn't ignore. I've always been good at balancing the books you see both in my bakery and in my life, a skill honed through years of freelance accounting. And Ethan, he'd left a trail of numbers that told a story I couldn't ignore. While he chased his fleeting dreams of climbing the corporate ladder, 3 failed sales campaigns, a midlife crisis that sent him to team-building retreats in the Columbia River Gorge. I kept our family from crumbling. I balanced our finances when he blew our savings on a flashy motorcycle, a purchase that tanked our budget in less than a year. I worked late nights auditing small businesses, making sure Avery's school fees were paid, while Ethan rebranded himself with a wardrobe of slim-fit jeans and overpriced sneakers. A rebrand that lasted about as long as a Portland cherry blossom, beautiful fleeting gone before you could savor it. My own dream expanding. Sweet bloom into a chain or starting an accounting firm to help women entrepreneurs always waited in the background. After Avery's settled in school, I'd tell myself kneading dough at 5 a.m. The Portland skyline a soft gray, through the bakery window, the Willamette River shimmering in the distance. After Ethan lands that big promotion, but with Ethan, promotions were as rare as a cloudless day in February. 5 months ago, I noticed irregularities in our joint account. Small charges, nothing massive, but they didn't add up. A round-trip ticket to Los Angeles, $500. A weekend stay at a boutique hotel in Bend, $1,800. A jewelry store purchased $200 for a necklace I'd never seen. At first, I thought it was a bank error, a glitch in the system. But I'm not the kind of woman who lets numbers slide. I've spent years catching errors in clients' balance sheets. I wasn't about to ignore this, so I dug deeper, quietly, methodically, like I was auditing a client's books for tax season. I logged into our account late at night, the bakery kitchen, silent except for the soft hum of the fridge, the Portland rain a steady patter against the window. I traced the charges, cross-checked them with our credit card statements, my fingers steady on the laptop keys. What I found was a betrayal colder than the Willamette in winter. Ethan had been siphoning money into a secret account for over a year. He'd taken Sadie to rooftop dinners in the Pearl District, bought her that necklace, even put a deposit on an apartment in Los Angeles, $40,000 non-refunded. All while telling me we needed to cut back for Avery's future. We can't afford that new mixer for the bakery right now. Lily, he'd said last month, his voice tight, as we sat at our kitchen table in Laurelhurst Avery's drawings, pinned to the fridge behind us. I'd nodded, trusting him, while he was wiring money to his mistress. Then I found the receipt. It slipped out of Ethan's jacket pocket one evening as I was hanging it up after he'd stumbled home late claiming a client dinner. A receipt for 2 at a swanky restaurant in downtown Portland, dated the same night he'd said he was working late. The numbers didn't add up, neither did his story. That same evening, I opened a separate account at a different bank, moving my personal savings from Sweet Bloom's profits into it. A week later, when Ethan suggested combining our accounts to streamline things, I agreed with a smile, all while transferring the bulk of our funds to my new account. The joint account, he'd just emptied it, held just enough to cover our regular expenses, about 2 months' worth of deposits. The rest was safe, along with detailed records of every shady transaction he'd made over the past year. I'd printed them out, organized them in a binder, each page a testament to his deceit, a recipe for his downfall. I met Sadie at last year's company picnic, a bright-eyed 22-year-old with a laugh that grated on my nerves. She'd hovered around Ethan, touching his arm, giggling at his terrible puns, her eyes sparkling like she'd discovered a treasure. I'd watched her, my stomach twisting, but I'd brushed it off. Ethan had laughed it off too. "She's just friendly, Lily," he'd said, sipping a craft beer, the sun glinting off his new Ray-Bans. Friendly? Right. I should have known then, but I didn't want to believe it. Not until the evidence was undeniable. I found more proof on his phone one night, when he'd left it on the kitchen counter passcode, unchanged despite his recent privacy concerns. A text from Sadie. "Can't wait for our new life in LA, baby. Finally, we'll be free." My chest tightened, a cold weight settling in. I scrolled through their messages, my hands steady, my heart racing. Plans for their new life together. His promise to handle things after Avery's school year ended. His decision to announce our split right after her last day, knowing I'd be too busy with the bakery to react. "She'll be too tired to fight," he'd written. Sadie replied, "Perfect. We'll be sipping cocktails in Hollywood while she's still figuring out what happened." I stood there, the rain tapping against the kitchen window, the smell of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven, feeling like my world had shifted off its axis. 14 years late-night baking sessions, cheering at Avery's soccer games, holding Ethan through his failures. It was all a lie, but I didn't break. I took screenshots, emailed them to myself, then locked his phone and set it back down exactly as I'd found it. Ethan came downstairs a few minutes later, whistling Clueless. "Smells amazing in here," he said, grabbing a glass of water. I forced a smile. "Thanks." What Ethan didn't know, what he never grasped, was that I'm a master at keeping the books balanced both in business and in life. I tracked every transaction, every late-night client meeting, every lie. I hired a private investigator, a sharp woman named Tara Reynolds, who specialized in domestic cases. We met at a cafe near the bakery, the scent of espresso and rain in the air, the bustle of the Pearl District alive around us. She handed me a thick folder, her eyes kind but professional. Photos of Ethan and Sadie holding hands at Venice Beach, laughing under the California sun. Receipts from a weekend in San Francisco, where they'd stayed at a boutique inn, sipping wine by the bay. A lease agreement for an apartment in Los Angeles signed in both their names. Tara's voice was gentle, her hands steady as she slid the file across the table. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Monroe. I know this isn't easy to see." I nodded, tucking the file into my bag, my hands steady. "Thank you," I said. I wasn't falling apart. I was building a case. I revisited the prenuptial agreement we'd signed 14 years ago, back when Ethan insisted on protecting his future earnings. He'd been so paranoid then, a young salesman with big dreams. Worried I'd take half if things went south. I'd signed it without hesitation. I loved him, believed in us. Now that document would be his undoing. Hidden in the fine print was an adultery clause, one that imposed steep financial penalties if either of us cheated. I read it late at night, the bakery quiet, the rain, a steady hum outside, Ethan asleep upstairs, unaware of the reckoning I was planning. The clause was airtight. I met with Henry Caldwell, my attorney, the next morning at his office in downtown Portland, the Willamette River glinting through the window. "It's ironclad," Henry said, sipping his coffee, a grin on his face. "With the evidence, you've got those transactions, the messages, the photos. He'll lose the house, the joint assets, everything." I nodded, stirring my latte, a quiet resolve settling over me. "Good," I said. "Let's move forward." I spent the next few months preparing, working in the shadows while Ethan planned his dramatic escape. I documented everything, every transfer, every text, every lie. I met with Henry again to file the divorce papers, timing it with precision. I knew Ethan would wait until after Avery's school year to make his announcement. He'd want to avoid upsetting her, or so he'd tell himself. What he didn't know was that I'd filed the papers that very morning before his text at the bakery. They were safely stored in court records not yet accessible to him, but ready to strike when the time was right. I was always 3 steps ahead. Ethan thought he'd caught me off guard with his message, but I'd been ready for this betrayal longer than he could imagine. I drove to our home in Laurelhurst, a cozy bungalow we'd bought 10 years ago, back when we were partners, or so I'd thought. The house Ethan had already promised to Sadie, according to those phone messages he didn't know I'd seen. I parked in the driveway, the familiar scent of wet grass and cedar greeting me. As I stepped out the rain, a gentle mist. Inside, everything looked the same. The hardwood floors we'd refinished after Avery's first birthday party when she'd spilled juice everywhere. The gallery wall of her milestones, her first finger painting, her kindergarten graduation, her soccer trophy from last year, the kitchen counter where Ethan and I used to bake cookies with her, laughing as Flower dusted our noses dreaming of her future. But everything had changed. The house felt hollow, a shell of what it once was. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, the faint creak of the stairs, a familiar sound. I opened the closet, my fingers brushing against the aprons I'd worn to countless bakery events, always the supportive wife. Behind them, tucked in the corner, were his suitcases, packed, ready for his departure tomorrow, right after his big reveal. I stared at them, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. He'd always been obsessive about his packing, folding his shirts, just so tucking his socks into neat rolls. But when it came to what truly mattered, he was careless, blind. My phone buzzed in my pocket, texts from friends at the bakery, from Nora, Ethan's sister, who'd always been more my friend than his. I pulled it out, my chest tightening at a message from Avery's school. Reminder end-of-year party. Today, I typed back a quick confirmation, my fingers steady, despite the ache in my heart. I'd kept Avery in the dark for months, not wanting to taint her school year. She'd worked so hard balancing soccer practice with her math tutoring, all while Ethan was siphoning money to Sadie. Avery would be upset I hadn't told her, but I knew she'd understand eventually. She had my knack for precision, my eye for detail, but she also had her father's charm, a combination that made her shine. I couldn't let Ethan's betrayal dim that light. Not yet. I sat on the edge of our bed, the quilt my mother had made for our wedding day. Soft under my hands, its stitches a map of a life I thought I knew. I thought about our early days, Ethan surprising me with coffee runs to Stumptown, the two of us hiking in Forest Park, laughing as we slipped on muddy trails. We'd been through so much, 3 failed sales campaigns that drained our savings. Avery's tough toddler years, when she'd wake up crying from earaches, and Ethan would sing her to sleep, his voice soft and low. A miscarriage before Avery, a loss that had broken us both. But we'd held each other through the grief. When had he changed? Or had he always been this man, selfish, deceitful, and I'd been too busy baking to see it? I shook my head, pushing the memories away. They didn't matter now. What mattered was the plan I'd set in motion. That envelope I'd left at the bakery wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a spark, a flare, a way out of the storm. I stood, smoothed my apron, and headed downstairs, ready for the fight I knew was coming. I stood, smoothed my apron, and headed downstairs, ready for the fight I knew was coming. 4 hours later, the sound of Ethan's car roared into the driveway, of our Laurelhurst home tires, skidding on the rain-slicked pavement, the noise cutting through the quiet hum of the Portland evening. The front door burst open, a gust of damp air rushing in, carrying the scent of wet cedar and the faint tang of gasoline. "Lily," he shouted, his voice, a mix of fury and panic, echoing through the house. "Where the hell are you?" I was in the kitchen, setting out a plate of chocolate chip cookies for Avery's after-school snack. My laptop open on the counter, a spreadsheet of Ethan's transactions glowing on the screen. I closed it with a soft click as he stormed in his face, flushed the manila envelope I'd left at the bakery, crumpled in his hand, the edges torn from his grip. "What is this supposed to mean?" he demanded, slamming the papers onto the counter, his voice cracking with rage. "Divorce papers. Filed on Avery's last day of school." "Are you out of your mind?" I looked up at him, my expression calm, my voice steady, as if I were explaining a recipe to a customer. "I thought it paired nicely with your timing." I said, each word deliberate, measured. "You wanted a fresh start. I'm just helping you get one." "This is ridiculous," he yelled, his voice rising, but I cut him off sharp and clear. "I had every right, just as you had every right to choose Sadie. We all make choices, Ethan." His phone buzzed in his pocket, a shrill vibration that sliced through the tension, the screen lighting up with a name I didn't need to see to know. He glanced at it, then ignored it, but I knew who it was. Sadie, no doubt, wondering why he wasn't at the airport where they'd planned to catch their flight to Los Angeles. He tried a different approach, his tone shifting to something smug, almost condescending. "That prenup, it's ancient history," he said, crossing his arms, a flicker of confidence in his eyes. "No lawyer will uphold it after all these years." I allowed myself a small smile, the kind that made his bravado falter, a quiet crack in his armor. "Actually, it's still valid. Section 14 states the adultery clause applies for the duration of the marriage. Your lawyer should have told you that." "Oh, wait, you didn't hire one, did you?" The color drained from his face, his smugness replaced by a dawning panic. His hands dropping to his sides. The prenup he'd insisted on to protect himself would now strip him of everything: the house, the joint assets, any claim to my bakery. His grand exit had just become the most expensive mistake of his life. "You can't do this to me," he said, his voice breaking as he sank into a chair, his hands trembling, the envelope falling to the floor. "We built this life together." I tilted my head, studying him, my tone cool, detached. "And you chose to burn it down, just not the way you expected." His phone buzzed again, more insistent this time, the screen lighting up with another call. He looked at it, groaned, his shoulders slumping further. "Problem?" I asked, a hint of amusement in my voice as I picked up the envelope and set it back on the counter. "Our flight, it's been canceled," he muttered, staring at the phone in disbelief, his fingers hovering over the screen. "The hotel in LA, it's gone too." I couldn't help but smile, a quiet, knowing smile, the kind that comes from being 3 steps ahead. "The flight you booked with our joint credit card. The hotel reservation you made with the same card." He nodded, still dazed, not seeing the trap I'd set. "You might want to check with the credit card company." I said, my voice deceptively casual, as if I were suggesting he try a new pastry. "I reported those charges as fraudulent. They've been blocked. I also had you removed as an authorized user." His eyes widened, a mix of shock and dread washing over him, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You what?" he stammered, his voice cracking, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I stood, gathering my purse and a small overnight bag I'd packed for Avery and me. You have until tomorrow evening to get your things out, I said, my voice firm, unyielding. After that, the locks will be changed. As I walked toward the door, Ethan called after me, his voice desperate, pleading a raw edge to it I hadn't heard in years. What about Avery? Have you thought about how this affects her? Think about our daughter. I stopped my hand on the doorknob, anger finally breaking through my calm facade, a fire I'd kept buried for months. Don't you dare use our daughter as an excuse, Ethan. She wasn't part of your plans when you were sipping wine with Sadie in San Francisco. I stepped outside, the Portland rain cool against my skin, a cleansing mist that washed away the heat of the moment, and drove across town to Nora's house near Portland State University, where she worked as a freelance graphic designer. The city lights shimmered through the drizzle, the silhouette of Mount Hood faint in the distance, a quiet promise of something steady amidst the chaos. Nora greeted me at the door with a fierce hug, her arms a safe haven after the storm. Her living room, a cozy refuge with sketch pads scattered on the coffee table, a pot of chamomile tea steaming softly. I just got off the phone with Avery's teacher, she said, pulling me inside her voice, thick with concern, her eyes searching mine. She told me Ethan tried to pick her up early, said he was taking her to LA. I froze my heart, racing, a cold wave washing over me. But Nora squeezed my hand, her grip grounding. Don't worry, I told the school not to release her. She's safe with her teacher until you get there. I let out a shaky breath, the tension in my shoulders, easing just a bit, gratitude flooding me. Thank you, I said, following her to the couch, sinking into the cushions, the warmth of the tea mug she handed me, spreading through my hands. I can't believe Ethan tried that. Nora said, pouring more tea, her eyes dark with anger, her hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. Right in the middle of Avery's last day, at her class party of all things. He's lost his mind. I took a sip, the chamomile, soothing, a sharp contrast to the damp chill of the evening, the rain, tapping a gentle rhythm against the window. It was meant to catch me off guard. I explained, setting the mug down, the steam curling softly in the air, a public exit so I'd be too shocked to fight back. Nora's face tightened, her lips a thin line, her fingers gripping her mug. My brother always loved playing the leading man, but it's beyond anything I imagined. We sat in her cozy living room, surrounded by her art prints and half-finished sketches, the windows fogged with the rain outside. Nora had always been a free spirit, her life a canvas of creativity and independence, a stark contrast to the chaos Ethan had brought into mine. I'd envied that about her. Over the years, the ability to live without compromise, to paint her own story. What was in that envelope that got him so rattled? She asked, her curiosity cutting through the quiet, her eyes bright with intrigue. I took another sip of tea, then met her gaze, a small smile tugging at my lips, the divorce filing. I said, my voice steady, a quiet triumph in the words, proof of his financial misconduct, and most importantly, the prenup that'll leave him with nothing. Nora's eyes widened, a sharp laugh escaping her, her hand covering her mouth in disbelief. The prenup, I remember him obsessing over it. Dad had just given him that sales bonus, and he was terrified of losing it. The irony, it's almost too perfect. My phone rang, the sound, piercing the stillness, the screen lighting up with Henry Caldwell's name, my attorney. I took a deep breath before answering, steadying myself. Lily, he said, his voice calm, professional, a steady anchor in the storm. I've got an update. The emergency filing was approved. The joint accounts are frozen, pending the divorce proceedings. Ethan now has limited access to funds just enough for basic expenses, not enough for the apartment he was eyeing in LA. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding a quiet triumph settling over me, warm and grounding. "Thank you, Henry," I said, my voice calm, a smile tugging at my lips. "Has he been served yet?" Henry's tone carried a hint of amusement, a rare crack in his usual professionalism. "Not yet, but we tracked him to the airport. He and Sadie are stuck. There seems their hotel reservation in LA was canceled too." I smiled, the warmth of the tea spreading through me. A quiet satisfaction in knowing Ethan's plans were unraveling faster than a poorly baked cake. "Good," I said, my voice steady, a flicker of mischief in my tone. "Let him stew for a bit." I hung up, turning to Nora, who raised an eyebrow, her grin mirroring mine. "Airport drama?" she asked, a playful glint in her eyes, her fingers tapping the mug. I nodded, a laugh escaping me light and freeing the first real laugh I'd felt in months. "He's about to learn what happens when you underestimate a baker who knows how to balance more than just a recipe." I nodded, a laugh escaping me light and freeing the first real laugh I'd felt in months. "He's about to learn what happens when you underestimate a baker who knows how to balance more than just a recipe." I glanced at Nora, her playful grin mirroring mine, but the moment of levity faded as I thought of Avery. Waiting at school, her class party likely winding down, unaware of the chaos her father had caused. "I need to pick up Avery," I said, setting down my mug, the warmth of the tea lingering in my hands, a quiet anchor in the storm. "She deserves to hear the truth from me." Nora squeezed my arm, her voice soft, steady. A lifeline I hadn't realized I needed. "You've got this, Lily, and I've got your back." I smiled, gratitude flooding me, and headed out into the Portland rain, the city a blur of gray and green. As I drove to Avery's school, the Willamette River, a shimmering ribbon in the distance. The preliminary hearing took place on a foggy Thursday morning at the Multnomah County Courthouse. The air thick with the scent of wet pavement and coffee. From a nearby cart, the kind of Portland morning that felt both heavy and cleansing. I arrived with Henry, my attorney, while Ethan showed up with a last-minute lawyer from a firm that handled small business disputes, not family law, a clumsy choice in his unraveling plan. The judge, a woman with a sharp gaze and a no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed the prenup with methodical precision, her glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, her pen tapping lightly on the desk. "This document appears to be in order," she said, her voice crisp, authoritative, cutting through the hum of the courtroom. "Do you contest its validity?" Ethan's lawyer, a nervous young man in a wrinkled suit, cleared his throat, his tie slightly askew. "Your Honor, we believe the agreement is outdated due to the passage of time." The judge adjusted her glasses, reading aloud, her tone unyielding. "Section 19 states the duration is for the term of the marriage, plus any legal proceedings resulting from its dissolution. There is no expiration indicated." Ethan leaned forward, whispering frantically to his lawyer, who looked increasingly uneasy, sweat beading on his brow. Furthermore, the judge continued, her eyes scanning the papers, "the evidence of systematic fund transfers violates the financial transparency requirements in Section 25. She looked up, her gaze piercing, landing on Ethan. "I am ruling to maintain the freeze on joint accounts pending full financial discovery. Mr. Monroe's personal account will remain accessible to him. The family home will remain in Mrs. Monroe's possession during proceedings as stipulated in the prenup's adultery clause." Ethan's face turned a deep shade of crimson, his hands gripping the table, his knuckles white. "This is insane," he muttered loud enough for me to hear. Across the courtroom, his voice a mix of defiance and desperation. The judge shot him a stern look, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. "Mr. Monroe, I suggest you review the agreement you signed more carefully. This court will reconvene in 30 days for the full hearing after discovery is complete." As we left the courtroom, Ethan caught up to me in the hallway, his steps quick, his voice low, a desperate edge to it. "Lily, please, we need to talk about this. Like adults, 14 years together, it has to mean something." I stopped, turning to face him, my expression calm but resolute. A quiet strength I'd found in the ashes of his betrayal. It meant everything. Until you decided it didn't. I walked away, leaving him standing alone in the courthouse hallway. The weight of his choices pressing down on him, like the Portland fog outside, heavy and unyielding. Word spread quickly through our social circle, a wildfire of whispers and speculation. The kind that thrives in a city like Portland, where everyone knows someone who knows someone. Friends called daily, some offering support, their voices warm with concern, others fishing for gossip to share at their next yoga class or book club. I kept my responses short, my voice steady, a practiced dignity I'd honed over the years. "Ethan and I are separating. I appreciate your concern, but I'd prefer to focus on moving forward." Meanwhile, Ethan's carefully crafted image, successful salesman, devoted father, crumbled like a stale scone. The financial freeze meant he couldn't keep his promises to Sadie. The Los Angeles apartment deal fell through the deposit, lost, a bitter irony for a man who'd thought he'd won. The new SUV he'd leased was repossessed, the dealership calling to confirm the cancellation, their tone clipped and professional. 2 weeks after the hearing, Nora called me, her voice tinged with amusement as she shared the latest. Her laugh crackling through the phone. "Guess what? Sadie moved on." I set down my rolling pin on the bakery counter, a small smile tugging at my lips, flour dusting my hands. Already I wasn't surprised, but the speed was impressive. Apparently she found out Ethan's company is on the brink of layoffs. Nora said, a chuckle in her voice. The big savings he bragged about, they're gone. She told her friend Grace she wouldn't date a man who can't afford his own place. I laughed, the sound light, freeing a warmth spreading through me. "He always was good at making promises he couldn't keep," I said, shaking my head, the scent of fresh dough rising around me. While Ethan's world shrank, mine began to grow like yeast in warm dough, steady and unstoppable. The financial security I'd kept in my separate accounts, ones Ethan never knew about, gave me a freedom he hadn't anticipated, a foundation to build on. I leased a small office in the Northwest District, a modern space with exposed brick walls and large windows overlooking the Willamette River, the water shimmering under Portland's gray sky. I launched Monroe Accounting Solutions, a consulting firm for women-led businesses, focusing on financial transparency and growth, helping others rise as I had. My first clients were 3 women, starting over a florist rebuilding after a bankruptcy, a yoga studio owner navigating a divorce, a graphic designer launching her first solo project. Their stories echoing mine in ways that felt both painful and empowering. Word of mouth spread quickly through Portland's entrepreneurial community, bringing more clients through my door, each one a testament to resilience. I helped women navigate their finances, new ventures, divorces, fresh starts, guiding them with the same precision I'd used to uncover Ethan's lies. The work filled me with purpose, each success a small victory, a reminder that I was creating something meaningful from the wreckage of my past. I also expanded Sweet Bloom, opening a second location near Powell's Books. The scent of fresh pastries blending with the smell of old books, drawing in tourists and locals alike. Avery helped me string fairy lights for the grand opening, her laughter echoing through the space as we worked together, her hands steady as she hung each strand. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said one evening, her words crackling through the phone as I drove home from the bakery, the city lights reflecting off the wet streets. "You're not just surviving what Dad did, you're thriving." Her words meant more to me than any legal victory could, a warmth that settled deep in my chest. "I'm just doing what I wish someone had done for me sooner," I replied, my voice soft, a smile tugging at my lips, helping women rise above their storms. Being valued for my expertise, not just my baking, felt like kneading a new dough, one that was all my own. The final divorce hearing fell on a crisp autumn day. The anniversary of the day Ethan had first walked into Sweet Bloom, a young salesman with a crooked smile, ordering a lemon cupcake and asking for my number. Now it marked the closing of a chapter that had spanned 14 years. Ethan arrived at the courthouse looking worn, his suit rumpled his eyes. Shadowed with exhaustion, a far cry from the man who'd once charmed me with coffee dates. I later learned his company had downsized, eliminating his position. After the scandal of his affair with Sadie hit the office rumor mill, a quiet justice I hadn't sought but welcomed. Sadie was long gone now, living in Seattle with a new boyfriend closer to her age. Her social media filled with photos of coffee runs and indie concerts. A carefree life she'd never found with Ethan. Most of our mutual friends had distanced themselves from him. After the full story emerged, their invitations to barbecues and game nights, quietly fading their loyalties, shifting in the wake of his betrayal. The judge upheld the prenup in its entirety, her ruling swift and final, her voice echoing through the courtroom like a gavel's strike. Ethan left with his personal belongings, his car, which he still owed money on, and the meager funds in his private account, barely enough for a small apartment in a less desirable part of Portland. I retained our Laurelhurst home, my retirement accounts, and 70% of our joint investments, exactly as the prenup dictated in cases of adultery. The justice felt like a warm loaf of bread, fresh from the oven, comforting, inevitable, a recipe I'd baked with care. The very document Ethan had insisted on to protect himself had become his undoing. As we left the courthouse, Ethan approached me one last time, his steps hesitant, his voice soft, a flicker of the man I'd once loved in his eyes. "I made a terrible mistake," he said, his gaze searching mine for something, maybe forgiveness, maybe a trace of the warmth we'd once shared. "Is there any chance we could—" I cut him off, my voice, gentle but firm, a door, closing softly, the final note of a song. "No, that door is baked shut." He nodded, his shoulders sagging, a quiet acceptance settling over him, the weight of his choices etched into his face. "I understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And for once, I believed he did. "I hope you find happiness, Lily. You deserve it." It was perhaps the first honest thing he'd said to me in years, a small gesture in the ruins of our past. I gave him a faint nod, then turned and walked away, the sound of my boots echoing on the courthouse steps, the Portland air crisp and clean against my skin. 6 months later, Monroe Accounting Solutions had outgrown its original space, a testament to the resilience of the women I'd helped. I moved to a larger office, a bright suite with skylights and a balcony where I could sip my morning coffee, watching the streetcars glide through the Northwest District the city alive below me. I hired 2 associates, both women, both passionate about empowering others, and together we built a community, a network of women rising above their own storms. My clients ranged from single mothers to established business owners, navigating major transitions, each one a story of grit and grace. Sweet Bloom had become a Portland institution with 3 locations across the city. The flagship store, a favorite spot for locals and tourists alike, its fairy lights casting a warm glow on rainy evenings. Avery now thriving at school, her confidence blooming like the roses in Washington Park. Helped out at the bakery on weekends, her laughter a melody that filled the space. "You know what's funny?" she said one afternoon as we worked together in the kitchen rolling out dough for tomorrow's scones, flour dusting her cheeks. "Dad thought he'd win, but he's living with Grandma now." I nodded, taking a sip of my espresso. The city skyline a canvas of gray and green through the window. Sometimes people can't see the recipe for their own downfall. I replied, my voice soft, reflective, a quiet pride in my words. The woman who'd once defined herself as Ethan's wife, as Avery's mother, had found a new identity, one forged in the flour and fire of betrayal. Baker, accountant, advocate. That receipt I'd found in Ethan's pocket, the one that had cracked my world open, wasn't just evidence of his deception. It was the yeast that made me rise, a spark that ignited a life I'd never dared to dream of. Behind it, I found not just justice, but a version of myself I'd never met, one who kneaded pain into purpose, who baked a future sweeter than any past I'd known. As I stood in the flagship Sweet Bloom on a typical Portland morning, watching the rain create patterns on the windows, listening to the gentle hum of satisfied customers, I realized I'd gained something far more delicious than revenge. I'd gained myself. Sometimes the sweetest justice isn't about getting even. It's about rising above the crumbs of betrayal, letting the rain wash away the past, and baking a new beginning that's all your own.